Hi, I'm Meredith Graves, and these are my Sisters in Christ guest picks. First, because I saw the zine shelf, I grabbed Armchair Demonology, which is a FIDDLER'S Green publication by Clint Marsh. I am particularly passionate about FIDDLER'S Green. I buy pretty much everything they put out. Everybody's got soul, but Clint has like all caps soul. He's incredibly passionate about small press publishing and about putting out a broad diversity of cultural and folkloric publications in a format that's really accessible, both in a literary capacity and in a money capacity. Like, it's a zine, it's punk, you can pick it up, it's cheap. And in occult publishing, which can be really heady and really talismanic and expensive and difficult to find. And, you know, only 3 of these were ever published, and they're bound in like goat skin harvested under a specific astrological configuration. You know, like, I like to buy a zine. I like what Clint does. I think FIDDLER'S Green is really good. And this one in particular is cool. I had to pick this up, not because I've read it, but because I've always wanted to. This is a novel. It's a novel by John Fowles. It's called The Collector. John Fowles wrote my favorite novel, one of my favorite novels that I've read in the last decade, and a book that literally changed my life the first time I read it. It's like a 700-page doorstop of a book, and I read it in one weekend, called The Magus, which is amazing, and which is not this. It is literally my favorite work of fiction, and probably my favorite book about magic that I've read in a really long time. John Fowles, this guy, he had some thoughts, and he had some time to think them. Why I grabbed The Collector, despite never having read it, is because... Oh, this is why I'm a hit at parties. Shit. The Collector is disproportionately cited by American serial killers as being a novel that inspired them to start kidnapping people and committing murder. There's a whole litany of bad dudes from American crime history who were like, yeah, I read The Collector, and I was like, into it. John Fowles, fucked up guy, love his books. And now for something completely different. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. I got really into Jane Austen during the pandemic, and this is me in my mid-30s coming around to like stuff that maybe in the past I really did think I was too cool for. I grabbed some records that kind of are in the same boat, but I got really into Jane Austen. Not something I thought I ever would have liked when I was younger. My background, I was lucky. I got to go to college, and my background is in English, and it's in literature, and I'm a voracious reader and a huge herb, if it's not like totally obvious. But Jane Austen was, those are romance books for girls, you know? Like, I'm an idiot. I know I'm an idiot. But I learned a lot about Jane Austen over the course of the pandemic because, you know, like everyone else in the world, I was watching Bridgerton because I had nothing else to do, and I got into, you know, the Regency period. Learning about Jane Austen as kind of a hallmark in the history of book publishing at all, in terms of women. She was one of the last great female authors who initially had her books published anonymously, or like written, Pride and Prejudice, written by a lady. Right? And then over the course of her sadly brief career, because she died really young, her name got out there, and she was one of the first female novelists who made being a female novelist a socially acceptable thing. Emma is particularly striking because like this is actually the story of me being a stuck-up bitch who like wouldn't let myself like what I liked. It's a hilarious book, especially if you're a person of a certain personality. Emma will be really fun. Emma is like the fuck around and find out of Jane Austen novels. Literally everyone should read Jane Austen. If I could recommend like one of the things in the giant pile that I have, it would be this or any Jane Austen novel. She's fabulous. Again, we're getting serious whiplash here. REZA NEGARESTANI, the Cyclonopedia. This is a book that you'll see on a lot of people's bibliographies and a lot of people's to-read list, and some of those people are cool, some of those people are sketchy. This book is fantastic. I haven't reread it in a long time, and it's difficult to describe in shorthand, so I'll give you one of the pull quotes in the front of the book, and then you can decide if you yourself want to read it or not. From Graham Harman, who's the author of Guerrilla Metaphysics, is the best description of this book. Reading Negarestani is like being converted to Islam by Salvador Dali. So I'll just, there's a section in here about like big oil being Satan's like feces in the void. Like, I love this. I cherish this book. And then even though I could have, I could have pulled 100,000 books and bored everyone talking about books forever. This is the last one that I grabbed, the collected interviews of Julia Kristeva. Again, I think low-key one of my life's missions is to drive the point home in every arena I'm afforded that philosophy is not boring, that thinking is actually a vibe. It's pretty chill, especially the thinking of this particular era that, is heavily influenced by Lacan, but not a derivative of Lacan necessarily. Kristeva, this like beautiful, brilliant, buttoned-up woman, actually wrote a lot about horror and philosophy, and her book, The Severed Head, which is literally just a big, thick book about the philosophical implications of the severed head, totally changed my life when I was in college and made me think differently about horror and philosophy and the like considerable Venn diagram where they overlap. And now, in today's day and age, you have everyone from, Ligotti to Eugene Thacker and so on and so forth writing about horror and philosophy, or the horror of philosophy, especially in the case of Thacker, although he kind of does both. But I think Kristeva really pioneered this, and I think for as popular as she is, her work in horror is kind of underrated. So I will be really excited to dig into this and continue to learn more from primary sources about what one of my like all-time brain heroes thinks about the world. We like books. This record, this band, these people. I have been moved like to the point of tears at Cloud Rat shows before, and I have seen Cloud Rat 1,700 dozen times because they have been a band for a really long time, like 10 years. Like every band I've ever been in has played shows with Cloud Rat, and I'm so privileged to be able to say that. From Detroit, three-piece, fronted by the amazing Madison, who is one of the most powerful, most evocative, and most straight-up terrifying vocalists in extreme music today. Also one of everyone in the band, some of the kindest people you've ever, people who want to truly embody the ethos of like wanting to bring people along for the experience when you're watching them play live, but also just like as people, wanting people to participate and be engaged. A really, really visceral band in every sense of the word. This, I think, was their first full length. This is a record from way back in the day, and specifically the last two songs on side A, Sinkhole and Yama, were two of the tracks that most impacted me in my early 20s when I was really, like, I've been playing in bands for 20 years now, but it was only about 15 years ago that I was in a band that was like okay enough to start going on tour and going to Detroit and playing with Cloud Rat and seeing Madison on stage kind of like looking like Susie Sue of the Thunderdome, like absolutely losing her mind, like doing these songs that, we're in this environment that can be so normative and so masculine, even when we're not trying to be. And seeing Madison in like a disintegrating wedding dress screaming about the mother wound in like 2011 was like a very extremely formative experience for me. So this record in particular, every record they've put out since is good, but this particular full length from Cloud Rat is, I think, one of the most special hardcore records of the 2000s, and one that I return to over and over and over and over again for some of that like blackened maternal life force that this band affords and continues to afford. It's really, really interesting music. Erik Satie, because I am not immune to the desire for ambiance, right? Satie, most people have heard some of the compositions of Erik Satie, even if they don't know they did. Some of his melodies are so even if you've heard them once, the Gymnopédies series, which is not on this particular, I grabbed this as like a representation of the existence of Erik Satie. Like it's a very good record, but you can see it's like a volume 2, and I think volume 1 probably had some of the better known stuff on it. But Satie's command of solo piano and his command of melody was revolutionary for his time. It's revolutionary now. Like when you hear a piece that was composed by Satie, you know that it was composed by Satie, and it will stick in your head worse than like any roller rink 80s pop song that you've ever heard. Satie is also of particular interest to me because during the time when he was alive and young and working, he was an occultist, I guess you could say. He was a Rosicrucian, and he kept elaborate notebooks and documented the role that metaphysics and spirituality and like this sort of pseudo-Masonic like seeker's quest played in his ability to make work and in his ability to do compositions. And a few years ago, I got to go to the Guggenheim when there was an exhibit about the Rose and Cross, and I got to see. They did a wonderful job digitizing a lot of those manuscripts. And so I got to go see some of his handwritten sheet music and a lot of his notes from his work doing magic with the Rosicrucians. And it kind of like, as someone who's always loved his works for piano, it really brought it all full circle to know that he really, his music sounds like angels gave it to him, right? So knowing that that's what he was thinking about and that's kind of what he was up to at the time was really one of those, like, you're at the museum and you don't know how to feel. Like, it was really overwhelming and a really beautiful experience. So, you know, classical for people who don't like classical, magic for people who don't believe in magic, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's really amazing. When I hold this record, I am 13 again. I will listen to BRAID on a desert island if I'm allowed no other records. When I was 13, 14 years old, I turned 14 like the week that 9/11 happened, right? So I came of age, I unfortunately had to go through puberty during peak nu metal, right? And that meant that where I was living at the time, I was surrounded by, you know, ICP and Slipknot, very cool bands also, but like I was a weird, I'm sure this will shock everyone to hear, but I was like a fucked up pretentious kid, right? Even when I was like a kid. And I needed something different, and at that point everyone was like getting into punk on the tail end of the emo revival, and I was like in upstate New York in a town of like 5,000 people with like a Cro-Mags record, not knowing what to do with myself. And then I heard bands like BRAID, and they were weird, and none of their songs were like very transparently like, a girl hurt my feelings so I'll kill her, which was like really peak thesis for music at that point. BRAID was weird, it was obtuse, it made references to musical theater and seemed to prioritize, I mean, Framing Canvas is another really good example of that, just in terms of like this band in particular, but BRAID lyrics always to me felt like hearing somebody like describing a photograph over the phone, right? Like they weren't trying to tell you how to feel about a person, about anything. They were just descriptions of things that had happened, and that was not something I knew people could do at that point. To this day, I'm not sure any band has had more of an influence on me in terms of how to write lyrics, because BRAID is just the most, damn it, interesting lyrics, pound for pound, of any band. I could read the lyric sheet without hearing the music and still be fascinated. So seeing this record, it makes me really, really happy. It just makes me happy. This band makes me happy. Also just things that you don't know you're allowed to do with a guitar when you're a kid, especially if you grew up listening to like punk and hardcore and weird stuff. BRAID did things that were so interesting musically, they changed the trajectory of my life. It's a very good record. And then this, absolutely shamelessly, this is the last record I grabbed. I haven't heard this. Actually, when I get back to New York next week, I'm picking this up at the library. I ordered this on Interlibrary Loan. I didn't know Lana Del Rey wrote a book. I didn't know that at some point in the last few years, she put out a book of poetry and then made like a spoken word album, which is what this is. Violet, Freudian slip. Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass is the audiobook of Lana Del Rey's first book of poetry. And I've kind of always been obsessed with her. Almost 10 years ago now, when I was still, you know, just a person playing in bands and trucking around and doing my thing, I got asked to like write an essay or a piece that I was going to read at an event. And I had been thinking about Lana Del Rey a fair amount, you know, 2014, 2015, whenever this was, and the difference between someone like her or someone like a Miley Cyrus or like a Nicki Minaj, like a woman performing as a caricaturized version of herself with a stage name, and how the treatment of someone at the time who was doing that was a little different than like a full-on character like an Andrew WK. So I put my thoughts down because, like, you know, we grow up writing about how we feel. We grew up writing zines and we put our thoughts on paper. And I published it, and it accidentally afforded me the career that I've had for most of the last 10 years of my life, which included like a stint as a music critic and a journalist and you know, doing all sorts of cool stuff like that. So I have Lana Del Rey to thank for like the reason I'm sitting in this chair today and still able to do music for a living and to think about it, because just considering her catalog of work in a way was the catalyst for like me being allowed to work in music outside of just being in bands. I still find her totally fascinating. And she just put a new record out too, and I would have grabbed that if I'd seen it. I think she is truly an amazing musician. She's a really novel vocalist. She's done some really fascinating things. And I think she's done it all while maintaining her freedom of choice. She clearly is a person who makes artistic and musical decisions based on exactly who she knows herself to be and exactly what she wants to see exist in the world. And I think that is way more rock and roll than she gets credit for. I think she's super cool. I am a fanboy. Clearly. But yeah, I think this is, you know, the perfect way to let people know where my allegiances really lie. And that's it. That's everything that I like in the world in a big pile.